This lesson is on solving quadratic equations. And specifically, we're going to solve them by graphing and solve them by using square roots. Okay, so let's just review real quick. The standard form of a quadratic equation is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is not equal to 0. And so b can be 0, c can be 0, but a can't. So what that tells you is that for a quadratic, you have to have a variable to the second power. You don't need this and you don't need this, but you have to have this at a minimum. So here's the key concepts in this. When you're solving a quadratic equation, you're going to set y equal to 0 and solve for the x. So you're going to solve the equation. So you're going to plug in 0 for y, and then you're going to solve this equation here. The solutions of a quadratic are often called the roots or the zeros. So if you hear someone say the roots of a quadratic or the zeros, they're talking about the solutions. And a quadratic will either have 1, 2, or no solutions. And I'll show you an example of that in just a second. So keep in mind it could have 1 solution, 2 solutions, or no solutions. And the solution or solutions that you get are actually the x-intercepts. So what you're finding are the x-intercepts of the graph of that equation. So let's look at what I mean by 1, 2, or 0 solutions. So here's a quadratic equation, y equals x squared minus 1. So set that equal to 0 and graph it. And you can see that this crosses the x-axis at -1 and +1. So there are 2 solutions to this quadratic equation. Also keep in mind that the -1 here translates to graph down 1 unit. So your vertex is shifted down. So this is an example of one with 2 solutions. Here's an example of one with just 1 solution. So the solution is just right here at the vertex because it only crosses the x-axis once. And here's one that's been translated upwards, so it doesn't cross the x-axis, and so this has no solutions. All right, so again, the solutions are really the x-intercepts. It can either cross the x-intercept twice, once, or 0 times. That's how you can have 1, 2, or no solutions. All right, so let's look at solving them mathematically instead of graphically. All right, so here's an equation, x squared equals 81. And so to solve this, this tells us what x is. I mean, what x squared is. We want to know what x is. So the way you solve this is by taking the square root of both sides of the equation. Remember, when you're solving equations, you can do anything you want as long as you do the same thing to both sides of the equal sign. So the square root of x squared is x, and the square root of 81 is actually positive or -9, because -9 times -9 is positive 81, and positive 9 times positive 9 is positive 81. So this is an example of one with 2 solutions. All right, let's look at this one. So we need to get the x by itself, so we're going to subtract 15 from both sides. So now I have 3x squared equals -15. Divide both sides by 3. Now I have x squared equals -5. Take the square root of both sides. And you can't ever take the square root of a negative number because there's nothing multiplied times itself that'll give you a negative. So to get a negative product, one of the numbers has to be positive and one has to be negative. So this is an example of one with no solution. So if you think about the graph of that, that means it's been translated up and it doesn't actually cross the x-axis, whereas the first one crosses the x-axis twice. All right, so let's look at another one of these. So we're going to subtract 16 from both sides. -16. You might be able to see where this is headed. For d squared equals 0, divide by 4. D squared equals 0. Take the square root of both sides. and you get d equals 0. So this is an example of one with one solution. So that tells you that the vertex, I can spell solution, I promise. The vertex is actually at the origin. All right, couple more. So p squared equals 289. So take the square root of both sides. You should have a calculator that has a square root button on it. And so what you would do is type in 289 and then hit that square root button. The button on your calculator will probably have the square root symbol with an X inside of it. So the square root of 289 is 17. So P equals, don't forget, positive or negative 17. So that means there are two solutions. So again, that means this one crosses the x-axis in two places, at 17 and negative 17. All right, so plus 12 r squared equals negative 25. You can't take the square root of a negative number, so this one is no solution. And that means it's been translated up and it doesn't actually cross the x-axis. And then one last one, so we'll add 8, 7x squared equals 0. So divide by 7, and you can see this is going to come out to 0. So x squared equals 0, square root, x equals 0. And so there's one solution. And again, that means that the vertex is at the origin. So it crosses the x-axis at one place, and that's at 0. All right, so that's it. I hope that was helpful to you. If so, give it a like and a subscribe. And feel free to leave me a comment. Until next time.